Hey guys, Sean here. Welcome to the F1 Word and to the podcast episode number 5. Today, I'm going to be joined by Stuart, aka Chamber, of course, as always, to discuss Formula 1.5. Yes, it's been a long time coming, but it's time to look at that midfield. If you're not sure what Formula 1.5 is, it is essentially what would happen to Formula 1 if we got rid of Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull. They've got a championship over on the subreddit and everything. It's really, really interesting and really intriguing. So we're going to discuss that just a little bit today. Let's start by saying, though, a very good afternoon to Stuart. Good afternoon, Stuart.
Good afternoon, Sean. How's it going at your end?
Yeah, all good. Nice sunny day, and I'm inside recording a podcast. It's probably the best place to be, talking about Formula 1 with you. How nice am I?
Perfect. And after such a good race and all.
Yes, Austria. I should ask you about that, really. I tend to at the start of these podcasts. How did you find that one? I'm just about over it. I loved every second of that. To be honest, I felt like a kid again watching F1. I think I tweeted with a few extra words, "This is Formula 1." That's what it felt like on Sunday. Formula 1 was back. I know it's still got its problems, and they're not going to go away after one race, but it was a nice recovery after, let's face it, a pretty dire weekend in France.
Yeah, this is what we turn up for, isn't it? And we'd had a couple of weekends where we sort of had to suck it up and try not to complain too hard, but it was quite tricky and we had to go through all these what's wrong with Formula 1 issues. And I should write, it hasn't gone away, but Austria was great fun from start to finish. Qualifying was interesting. The race was fascinating and never let up. We had Verstappen coming through did he end up 8th on lap 1? To win the race in the last couple of laps. A little bit of controversy. I don't know if you noticed.
Just a little bit.
Mercedes having an off weekend and then some battles in the midfield. Austria is a great track, considering it only has about 2 corners and it's a minute long in lap time. Really, really good fun. So yeah, enjoyed it immensely. I'm so glad it came just a week after France so we could forget about France pretty quickly.
I think that was the best thing, just to forget about that weekend. I'm going to put you on the spot really, really quickly. You don't have to give a reason or anything if you just want to say yes or no, but was it a penalty in your view for Verstappen? I'm sure people would love to know and open up the debate and really wind people up once again.
No. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but no. I could see why there was a fine line and it warranted discussion and stuff. And, there was a lot of debate and I think a lot of it came down onto which driver you liked best, to be honest. But yeah, I could see the discussion about being forced off versus just fair, hard racing, and we don't want to put people off going wheel to wheel. I think this is kind of it's in that nice zone. It's on the line. It worked for me. It was exciting. Verstappen was clearly faster, and he just muscled his way in. And I don't think Leclerc defended enough to sort of have the rights to that part of the track. In my opinion. And a shame for Leclerc. I really wanted to get that win. It's a shame that we've had 2 races this year now where he's had a pretty dominant weekend, only for it to sort of fall apart at the end. But we know his time will come. He's only 21, so very much a whole career ahead of him.
Yeah, there's only about 2 weeks between them, isn't there, age-wise? So what it did do, I said this on Sunday as well, it's potentially set us up for a very, very exciting period of Formula 1. I am perfectly fine with Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc doing that every weekend for the next 10 to 15 years. I've got no problem with that at all. So very exciting stuff. But we're going to move on from Austria and talk about Formula 1.5. I was saying at the start, Stuart, there's a whole subreddit, and it's quite fascinating when you look at it, this whole what would happen if we removed Ferrari, Red Bull and Mercedes from the championship. It would basically blow it wide open. But we were talking, this is kind of more about the midfield as well. We spent a lot of time during testing talking. I've not been back through the full 64 hours of streaming that we did for testing or anything like that. Maybe I'll find some time during the summer break if I really have nothing else to do. But we talked a lot about the midfield and we knew it was going to be close. I think everybody could see that it was only testing. But we kind of sat and tried to come up with pre-season an idea as to what the running order would be in that midfield. And I don't think either of us, you can correct me if I'm wrong, predicted McLaren would be as strong as they were. I think we kind of thought they'd be in with a shot of the 4th place, the best of the rest title, but probably maybe 6th place, 5th if best. But they've been one of the revelations, I think, this season, in my opinion. And I don't know if it's because they've got the fastest car as such. I think Haas, if they could switch their tyres on, would probably have the fastest car. If Renault could deliver some consistency, they could be a shout for 4th place in terms of the outright pace. But what McLaren have been is massively consistent. So when Renault, for example, have had their up and down yo-yo weekends, I think is what Daniel Ricciardo's been calling them. When Haas haven't been there to pick up the points that they need to because of their tyre issues, when Alfa have been a bit all over the place and Toro Rosso haven't been, McLaren have been there, just being consistent, picking up those points, and Norris and Sainz have both been brilliant. I never expected McLaren to be where they are after, 9 races, and I think they're 52 points in the championship, 20 clear of their engine supply. Don't forget Renault. It's been a fantastic start for them, and I've got to say, probably going to be accused of British bias, but it's fantastic to see them back up there and fighting and being able to challenge.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming, hasn't it? And it would have seemed weird 10 years ago that we'd be celebrating just this for McLaren, but it is something worth celebrating. It is a step up for them. They did have a sort of a dodgy period during the flyaway parts of the season, but otherwise, yeah, absolutely right. 'Cause there's a lot of consistency happening, and they're just sort of starting to solidify that 4th place in the championship. It's really nice to see. I'd be interested to hear what's happening on the inside that's kind of starting to make things all come together. We've seen a different attitude from them as well, I think, particularly through the Honda years. They had this kind of like, we're one of the best teams, we've got one of the best chassis, and it's just the engine that's letting us down. And the engine was poor, but I think they kind of used it as an excuse to mask problems that were much deeper, including the chassis, including the management. And now they kind of don't have that to hide behind. They've sort of a bit more humble, and they're setting themselves realistic goals, and they're celebrating, small handfuls of points, but consistent handfuls of points. And it's really nice to see, and I'm excited to see what happens next to them. Of course, breaking into that top 3 is very hard, but, they are McLaren.
Yeah, I mean, that top 3, this is supposed to have been the year, in air quotes, supposed to have been the year that Renault started to worry the likes of Red Bull, started to knock on that door. And actually, I would say that McLaren are closer. And it's not just this season. I annoy people with my opinion on McLaren. I've said quite often that I don't think they will win a championship again before this season. I was quite happy or quite comfortable to say that, because they didn't feel like McLaren. I don't know how to explain it. When I was growing up, you had Ron Dennis, who was quite open, quite frank. He ran that team, I guess, regimentally, if that's even a word. He was in complete control. Everybody knew what they should be doing. They were championship challengers year in, year out, and that's what I expected. But then he moved on. The team kind of broke up a little bit from what it used to be. I didn't see a way back for them, but now I think there is a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. I don't think we're looking at title challenges anytime soon. I probably think 2021 is not going to happen either, even with these rules resets or whatever is going to happen then. But I just feel like there's a little bit of light there, that maybe they can start knocking on the door of that top 3, as you were saying, and just start to make people look at McLaren and go, oh, remember when they were great, rather than, oh, remember when they kept blowing up with that Honda. I'm just so genuinely pleased to see them there. But I've got to give huge credit to both drivers. Lando Norris, I did not think was going to be ready for Formula 1 this year. I said that all winter. I thought another year in Formula 2 was what he needed, because I didn't think he was all that consistent last year. But he's turned up, he's quick, as we saw in Austria, not afraid to go wheel to wheel with the likes of Lewis Hamilton, Kimi Raikkonen, so no fear there at all. And Carlos Sainz, who again, I said on Sunday, I was quite harsh about over the winter, didn't feel he was all that good in 2018, despite the fact I think he'd had more points finishes than anybody else in the midfield. He's just, I'll tell you what he's done, Stuart. He's turned up and he's bought the Carlos Sainz that was the next big thing at Red Bull, if that makes sense. That's the Carlos Sainz we've got this year, and I think it's brilliant. They've got such a good driver lineup, and it's young as well. So tie them down long term and get this team right. And I know James Key's in there now. Be interested to see what impact losing Pat Fry has. But yeah, I think they've got a very solid foundation for the long term future at McLaren. And they talk about the long term plan, don't they? So hopefully, I don't know about top 3. I'd love to see them challenge for top 3, but best of the rest this season and keep that going for a couple of years, and you never know.
Yeah, that would be good to see. I think they would, they definitely can start thinking about targeting 4th confidently at the end of the season. And about the drivers, you're absolutely right. They are full of energy, full of talent, not afraid to, stick those cars where they don't belong. They don't care who they're up against. I don't know if this was something we sort of discussed, but I had this worry going into the season, because McLaren just felt like somewhere that you as a driver you would go and then just sort of melt away, because it just hadn't helped people in the last few years. even people like Fernando Alonso, who, yeah, he had his days when he was fighting for everything, but then he had his days when he just looked like he was tired of everything. But they've turned up with the kind of attitude of, yeah, we're going to get every single point we could possibly get. And thankfully, they've got a sort of car underneath them that could do it. And it is the consistency that's bringing this team to the front, because a lot of the other teams do have this very up and down season, and some of them have really surprised us. I know we'll go through them a bit, but, Haas, what happened to them? Racing Point, we knew it was going to be a bit of a transitional year, but still, they're not where I expect them to be. And then you sort of got Kimi Räikkönen mixed in there just because he's Kimi Räikkönen. It's very strange, the midfield, and it's not as sort of. I think by about this time last year, we sort of had a feel for where every midfield team was, and this year I still don't feel like we have. I don't know who's going to be 4th, 5th, and 6th. That's
a good thing, though, isn't it? It's nice to have that unpredictability from weekend to weekend, but it's like they go back to consistency. McLaren have been quick and consistent. I still think Renault would probably, if they got the weekend together, as we saw in Canada, for example, would probably have the 4th fastest package overall. But McLaren are doing, at the end of the day, you can have the 4th fastest car, but if you're not consistent with it, you're not going to get anywhere. So McLaren are doing that. I should just say as well, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll have seen it scrolling on screen. McLaren are top of the F1.5 championship with 213 points. So nowhere near as good as Mercedes have been this season, of course, but that would still be a very nice haul after 9 races. And Sainz tops the drivers on 119 points. I mean, that kind of highlights the consistency that's there. Sainz favourite for that title at the moment, and I'm over the moon for them. But we'll talk about Renault. Really disappointing this year. I know there's been signs of improvement over the last few races, but I expected so much more. And I don't know if I got caught up in. I mean, I didn't think they would challenge for 3rd. I thought they'd be able to sort of worry Red Bull at some races, but I didn't think they'd be 3rd. Some did believe that they would end up as the 3rd best team, and Red Bull would fall into 4th. But I expected them to be closer than they have been, more because if you look at the last few years, since they came back as a full-time constructor, if you like, they've always improved. They've shown improvement year on year, and then this year they've kind of, I don't know if they've gone backwards or if it's just everybody else has improved just that much more. It's quite difficult to work it out. As I said earlier, Daniel Ricciardo can't explain why they have these yo-yo events, why one weekend they're strong, the next weekend they're not. And Nico Hülkenberg said about Austria that they just couldn't get anything right at all. So it's concerning because it can't be the drivers. I said this about McLaren and Alonso. It can't be Alonso. Some would argue that behind the scenes maybe it is, but on track, you give Alonso a car, he will deliver. I would expect Ricciardo and Hülkenberg to both deliver. Hülkenberg proved it last season. He's proved it with Force India. Daniel Ricciardo showed it at Toro Rosso, Red Bull. It can't be them. So there's got to be something fundamentally wrong with the car. But I've had a look around and they're all very... Cyril Abiteboul seems very vague about it all. Sort of, we've got a few problems. We're looking into it. We think we're getting there. The car's got a good baseline pace. And you're thinking, well, what's the problem? I know they're not going to come out and say, right, guys, this is the problems we've got, because then they're going to expose themselves to their rivals. But you usually get an idea. With Haas, we know it's the tyres, for example. So what's going on at Renault? I'm really frustrated with them because I expected them to be right up there, top of the midfield, scaring the crap out of Red Bull on some weekends, and they're nowhere near. It is funny, isn't it? And I, was definitely talking the biggest game about Renault going into this season, and for many of the reasons that you said, that year on year they'd improved. They seem to have a solid foundation. They had 2 great drivers going into this year, so it seemed like this was the year that they would, that top 3. I was actually thinking they could challenge the top 3 because I wasn't entirely sure what that Red Bull Honda would be like. And, thankfully, actually, it's been pretty solid. But no, they're on, both drivers are on equal points, 16 points in the full Formula One championship, but they've only had 3 points finishes each. Daniel Ricciardo, who left Red Bull partly, I think, through frustration at retiring so frequently and not being able to capitalize on his pace, essentially retired 3 times in the first 4 races. I know in Bahrain it was technically counted as classified because it was about 2 laps from the end. Yeah. But, it's not what he came here to do. And hopefully he's still got the hopefully they both still got the mindset of, we're down, but we can build up from here. It's definitely not where the team or the drivers expected to be. But I think one of the benefits of being in a works team is you sort of know that there's the resource to build up. You hope. And even, they are being particularly coy about what's wrong with that car, but I think they have. I
DAs. It sounds like they sort of tried some revolutionary updates across the winter and they didn't really work. So they've ended up sort of going a bit backwards, but they're not alone in that. And it's a big shame actually that they are still being, what do I say? They're still being sort of shown up by a customer team in McLaren now rather than Red Bull.
Yeah, I'd never thought about it like that. Yeah, they split up with Red Bull, thinking they're going to be top dog, and they're not, are they, at all? I mean, I think we both agree that it's not the drivers. I think I can't see how Ricciardo has suddenly lost his talent or Hulkenberg's lost his consistency. But like you said there, I did write it in my notes. 6 points finishes between them is not what I was expecting. In fact, I believe, I'm just going to check my notes again, but I think they're no better in that respect, really, than I think Alfa have had 7 and Racing Point have also had 6. So that's not what I was expecting at all from them this season. Do you think maybe with the summer break looming large now, there'll be updates obviously between now and then, but probably big update package in Belgium. Maybe they're, I guess, trying to make sure they've got that right, so at least the, I guess, technically second half of the season and the flyaways is going to be a little bit better for them, because that top 4 fight, if you look at the actual championship, is going to go right down to the wire, because I think Haas have got about 16 or 17 points, and McLaren are up there on 50 odd. So there's not, I mean, it's a big gap, but it's not insurmountable for anybody in that midfield, is it? Apart from, obviously, one team, bless them, down the back end.
Yeah, absolutely not. And this is definitely, because the midfield is so much closer than the top 3, one team can bring an update that changes everything, that pushes them forward, 3 slots on the constructors' standings in terms of outright pace, so then they can suddenly start being more dominant in the midfield for the second half of the season, and those points can swing around, pretty fast, especially if they end up being quite consistent and others around them don't. So even someone like Haas, even someone like Racing Point, if they sort of find a development upgrade, maybe in the summer, maybe before then, if Haas figure out how to manage those tyres better, if Racing Point, I'm actually not sure what's wrong with Racing Point, but and start going to tracks they favour, then McLaren could still end up 6th again in the title. So it's not all over, but McLaren certainly have got themselves in a good, solid position going forward. So Renault, again, could go either way. There's no sort of signs coming out of that team about what's going to happen next. Are they going to focus on 2020? Or are they going to try and hammer down the rest of this season? Are they going to just throw engines at it like some teams do when they're on their knees?
I wonder if there's do you think perhaps they're waiting to see what happens at the end of October with regard to 2021? Because they strike me as probably them and McLaren in that midfield are the 2 teams that will switch focus to 2021 pretty much immediately, as soon as those rules are signed off. So I wonder if there is an eye on those before they do too much or plan too far ahead. But I guess the point I'm making is if Renault decide to decide to put focus on 2021 rather than 2020, that is going to have an impact at McLaren, isn't it? Because they're supplying the power unit.
I think they still need to be seen as a credible supplier and engine, and I think they still need to try and get as high up the championship themselves as they can. But on the point of sort of starting to shift your resources from current championships to future championships, those 2 teams, that McLaren and Renault, are the 2 teams in that midfield, in that sort of under the bottom 3, in that Formula 1.5 category, that with the most resources to be able to do that. They could put the most work in to getting themselves ready for 2021. And in that respect, maybe the top 3 should be looking over their shoulder at them while they're throwing everything at an actual world championship and race wins. Because even though McLaren and Renault are struggling now, they could, by getting on it earlier and by using the resources they have, they could make a hell of a start on 2021. I'm not saying they will, because let's be honest, Mercedes, McLaren and Red Bull are serious competitors, but much more than Haas, Racing Point, Sauber, and sadly Williams, the rest of the teams are not going to have as much to chuck at the new rules to try and get a jump on everybody else.
You say that. I've had a rules reset on F1 2019 and I'm driving for Williams and we're like 4th fastest now. I mean, come on. That's a computer game, Sean. If only it could transfer into real life as easy as that. But a team, I am going to come to Haas because I just can't work them out at all. To be fair, they can't work them out at the moment. But Alfa Romeo, I've got to be honest, I don't really know what to say about them. They were the dark horses in pre-season, I think it's fair to say that, and they had a solid start to the season, had a few races where they tailed off, but I don't really remember seeing all that much from them, yet they've got 22 points on the board, sit in 6th place, and it turns out they've just been quietly plugging away nice and consistently apart from odd races, getting on with it. Gio got his first point as well in Austria. I don't really know what to say. I think, personally, that's... If they'd have been offered that at the start of the season, they'd have taken 22 points after 9 races, and what's that, 30 off 4th place? I know Kimi Räikkönen has done a lot of the work and the heavy lifting there, if you like, but I don't know. I just don't know what to say about Alfa, Stuart. I really don't. They're just consistent, solid.
Yeah, I think their car's pretty solid. I think, off the back of that Sauber, which was a great little car last season, and in the hands of Kimi Räikkönen, it's looking great. I mean, yes, Kimi Räikkönen has 21 of those 22 points. Let's not forget. And he's single-handedly got 6 points finishes by himself. I'm not going to lay into Gio particularly. It's his first season in Formula One. He's he's got about 20 years less experience than Kimi Räikkönen, so I don't think we need to worry about him too much. But it would be interesting to know if there were 2 Kimi Räikkönens in that team, they could have 42 points, which is close to McLaren.
Yeah, 10 points off.
Yeah, so between Renault and McLaren, it's interesting to see. I mean, Kimi Räikkönen is kind of doing what we expected him to do. He's very solid. He's happy now that he's not, I think, in a top team in the spotlight all the time, and he just gets down to racing because
isn't it?
Yeah, we've seen him in Q3 a lot. We've seen him in the top 10 a lot. He's sort of the one consistent factor in the midfield. He's just always kind of there. He had a bit of a ropey string of races from, I think, Spain to Canada, but I think Sauber should be really glad they managed to pick up Kimi Räikkönen and not go with maybe 2 youngsters. It'd be interesting to see if one of the other rookies, that sort of the Norrises and the Russells and Albons, if they were in Giovinazzi's seat, how many points they would have got. But I don't think they would have been toe-to-toe with Kimi Räikkönen. I don't know. It's hard to say, isn't it? I've said this before. Giovinazzi's in a bit of a Alonso Van Dorn situation where it's really hard to judge him because he's next to a world champion who hasn't really lost it yet.
Yeah, I mean, you know me on Stoff. I'm not gonna give him a hard time, but Gio, I would say, is performing better than Van Dorn was against Alonso. I think he's out-qualified Kimi at least once. I haven't got the stats up, but it's at least once. I think technically twice because he got a penalty after out-qualifying him somewhere. So I think he's definitely closer to Kimi than I was expecting, but I completely agree. If they'd gone with 2 rookies, say, or dare I say, again, bless him, if Marcus Ericsson was still there, they wouldn't be on 22 points. There's absolutely no way. I'm not saying they would have been terrible and would have been struggling, but they wouldn't be where they are. Kimi is definitely doing, dare I say, making them look better than perhaps the car is. I'm trying not to be harsh because I just don't know how anybody can be disappointed with 6th place given, I think, what people were expecting. But I think dark horses was a good term to use pre-season, and they have been. But again, just quietly plugging away nice and consistently. But I'm going to move on because otherwise I'm just going to repeat myself once again on Alfa. But Haas, what on earth? I mean, the pace is there. This is what's frustrating me with Haas. The pace is absolutely there. We've seen it in qualifying. Kevin Magnussen, 5th in Austria on the grid. We've seen, I think, in Formula 1.5, there's been pole positions for him and Grosjean pretty solidly as well. So the baseline is there for them. And it's all apparently coming down to these tyres on race day that I think Gunther Steiner said were overheating massively on the outside and were still stone cold in the middle. And this has been going on now since, season start, pretty much, hasn't it now? And they haven't been able to rectify this. And I think the longer this goes on, the more, or the less likely it is it's going to get solved. If they haven't solved it by now, are they really going to find a fix before the end of the year? I can't express how frustrated I am with them and for them as well. Like I say, it's quite clear that they're quick, that there is a good foundation of speed. That's a really good way to put it. A good foundation of speed in that car, but it just isn't working. And at the end of the day, the way Formula One is at the moment, you can have the quickest car in the world. You can have all the speed you want, but if the tyres don't work, you can't deliver that speed. You can't show that pace. And I'm concerned for them this season. And I do not believe 9th reflects the actual performance in that car.
Like, I kind of agree with you. The pace is there in the car, obviously. I don't have the table in front of me, but I think first 3 races they were in, both cars were in Q3. They had a great start qualifying to the season. And if the races were 3 laps long, then they'd be shining stars. But the races aren't 3 laps long. And if you haven't built a car that could be fast for 60 laps, then the pace that's there, I don't know necessarily counts.
Yeah.
It's like hard, but it's sort of like sending Usain Bolt out to do a marathon. Probably wouldn't do that well because he's not trained and worked his way up to be a marathon runner. He's worked his way up to be a sprint runner. And that car's very good at sprints and hasn't been designed to sort of go for the long haul. I know I don't want to get into a long discussion about tyres and stuff. I know there's a lot of things we could change about the tyres and how quickly they degrade, and maybe we should just make tyres that can be pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed forever. But that's not where we are at the moment, and other teams have managed to sort of build their cars that can last for a full stint. Their performance in Austria was absolutely shocking. They just drop through the field from
like a stone, wasn't it?
Just where did they go? It was ridiculous, and it's embarrassing. And there are some associations with Haas that I'm not a particular fan of, but actually the team I like, and I've come around to Kevin Magnussen. I like Romain Grosjean, even though I think he's sort of at the tail end of his career now.
Rubbish.
And I think we need a team like Haas in the field. It's good to have an American team. It's good to have a solid second Ferrari team in there, and someone giving a midfield a run for their money, which they were doing last year. And it's kind of frustrating to see them having this kind of season, but hopefully it is just one season. When we were talking about like people who could jump the midfield, Haas could do it this year if they figure something out. It could be something as simple as changing some suspension geometry that allows the tyres to be handled a little better over long distances or something. And then the second half of the season, we could see them coming back. But they have only scored 4 points finishes this year, which is definitely not what they're expecting. Haas was another team we talked a big game about going into this season. They'd shown themselves so strongly. And actually, they should have come fourth last year if they didn't have such a calamitous first half of the season where they kind of just threw points down the drain repeatedly. Whereas this year, the pace just hasn't been there on a full distance.
It must feel pretty disastrous for them to be down in ninth place in the actual championship. But I will say, 7 points and they jumped to sixth, assuming that nobody else scores sort of out of Alfa Racing Point and Toro Rosso. So it's not all doom and gloom. But what Kevin Magnussen is, he's not afraid to mince his words, is he? But he's quite damning. He said in Canada, worst weekend he's ever had, which Gunther Steiner soon shut him up on, which I think was the right thing to do. But he says I think words like helpless is a term that he's used a couple of times now. Is how he feels in the car on a Sunday, and that's not good. But they're blaming the tyres. They're pointing the finger at the tyres. A lot of us are saying, it's Pirelli for bringing the wrong tyres this year to Formula One. They want to go back to the other ones from last year to try and close the field up. Toro Rosso seem to be doing all right. Racing Point are okay with them. Alfa, Renault, McLaren, they're managing. They're getting the heat in those tyres and making them work the best they can with what they've got. So is it Pirelli's fault, or is this Haas's fault, I guess is what I'm saying? It's surely if others can make the tyres work, and I guess this actually, trying not to talk about the top three teams, this I guess could refer to Ferrari and Red Bull. If Mercedes can make them work, then everybody should be able to make them work. It's up to the individual car, so the team needs to find a way to get them working. It's all right pointing the finger. I know that's the way in Formula One. Teams will not take the blame for things that they can palm off on other people, but they need to make them work, and that's their responsibility, not Pirelli's.
Yeah, I think you put yourself in a very shaky position when you point the finger at the one thing that every single team has the same. These are different tyres to last year, but they're not wildly different. They're tyres you used a version of several times last year, by which I mean these are the they got slightly thinner tread, so they sort of heat up a bit faster, so they're a bit more durable. They were used, I can't tell you, at Barcelona, Great Britain, and some other race last year. So they're not, and extensively through the Abu Dhabi testing, which they do at the end of the year before even they go into the winter. So it's not like they didn't have a clue, and it's not like the other teams around them haven't managed to make it work. So it's not something you can really point a finger at when you're trying to make excuses for how competitive you are compared to other people who have exactly the same thing to deal with. Maybe blame a wind tunnel error or something.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, go back to your other point. It's not like Pirelli rocked up in Australia and went, here's your tyres. They've had plenty of time to make them work. They've got simulations and whatnot. So I don't think Pirelli are to blame. Although I will say actually quickly on Pirelli, Ferrari, but Mattia Binotto saying he's quite disappointed. I think it was a term used, or disgusted or something like that, beginning with D. It was not the best words, about teams vetoing the decision to try and switch to the other tyres, but it's mid-season. you know, when this isn't the second race of the year and teams are and all the teams are 6 seconds slower than Mercedes. If that was the case, then fair enough, really go for it. It's obviously a tyre issue if everybody's struggling, but it's not. I agree with you. They're all the same. It's the only, I think Paul di Resta likes to say this quite a lot, it's the only part on an F1 car, or more or less, that is identical. So you can't, I just don't think the finger can be pointed at Pirelli. People will, and that's fine, but Romain Grosjean super quickly. We've talked about Magnussen. I think Magnussen's doing all right, given the car. I do like K-Mag, but Grosjean, bit of bad luck, but not really shown a huge amount of racecraft either when the bad luck hasn't gone against him, or the luck hasn't gone against him. So I don't want to lay into Rowe. I know people think I've got an issue with him. I do most of it to wind Dan up, but I'm just not. I think he's probably in his last year with Haas, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I'm not feeling it particularly. And I don't think we've even got any snippets to kind of look back on. Like, look at this time when he went wheel to wheel with someone, or look at this amazing overtake he did, or, you know, he really out-qualified the car this day. I was
going to say, sorry, I'll interrupt you, sorry. I was going to say, I've just done a video on Gasly, and even he, as poor as he's been this year, has shown glimpses of what he's got. And Romain Grosjean hasn't really, like you say, there's not a highlight, is there? But sorry for interrupting your point, just to make no point whatsoever.
No. He's one of those drivers that's just kind of there now. And actually with such a sort of stirring pot of drivers that are sort of ready to start thinking about moving up to Formula One, you can't really have drivers who are just there anymore.
A couple of other teams in that midfield, Racing Point and Toro Rosso. Toro Rosso, I think they are probably now at a point, because they've started taking penalties, where they are going to become, as we feared, or not feared, as we suspected, Red Bull's development team. I know they kind of are anyway, but I think Honda are just going to throw all sorts at that car now, and so are Red Bull, ready for 2020. So 17 points, 9 races in. Of course, they're still going to pick up points, hopefully, between now and the end of the season, but they're going to be hampered with penalties. I think upgrades in Spa is the next one they're talking about on the Honda power unit, so I think they can be happy on 17 points.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even if they do take penalties, it's nothing stopping them from scrapping their way back up to the points. I think they're fully capable of it. And Albon and Kvyat are very exciting drivers to watch.
Yeah.
They got a great couple of drivers there. I think they know what team they're in. And I think they'll take it on the chin, just having to take penalties. That's just sort of comes with the game. I don't think, you know, there's a lot of teams on the grid where you kind of understand what their ambitions are. And I don't think all of them have realistic hopes of winning the Constructors title anytime soon. But you know, there are teams who are like, yes, we'd like to be best of the rest, or we want to beat Renault, but Toro Rosso, you never really get a sense of what their ambition actually is. And they sort of do feel more than any other team, a junior team to another team. I still want to see that Honda improve and become, you know, they've got their first win under the belt, Honda, but I definitely want to see them be like sort of fundamentally a top engine with the rest of them. They're almost there, I think. We haven't really looked at the season and thought, well, that Red Bull is just really lacking in grunt. It's not been something that's shone out in the way it did with McLaren.
No, and even with Renault in the Red Bull, I think they look better in a straight line than they did with Renault. I'll get my words out in a second, but just on Toro Rosso, I think the thing is, they are a test team for Red Bull anyway. We know that, and I think they're going to be, as the season progresses, it's just going to ramp up. But I don't think that's a bad thing for Kvyat and Albon, and it kind of sums up Toro Rosso as a team, because those drivers are in that Toro Rosso with an eye on that Red Bull. They want to be in one of those seats. So I'm not gonna say it because I've done a Gasly video, so people have already had my opinion, I think, depending on when it goes out. If not, then you will soon hear my opinion. And it's a 10-minute video, so I certainly give my view on him. But Marco saying Gasly is safe for this season. They're not looking at replacing him mid-season, and he's like, or they think he's going to see out the season. I briefly do think that if he doesn't perform, Marco will lose patience and will drop him. But do you think he's under any immediate danger, and do you think Kvyat is the one that's going to jump in that car if they do make a change?
So clearly they're still sort of working with him and trying to find out what works. And again, he's in Max Verstappen's shadow. I wouldn't necessarily want to be in that position as a young driver. Shades of Eddie Irvine's comment about being Schumacher's teammate and it feeling like being beaten over the head with a cricket bat daily come to mind. Having said that, Red Bull have also been saying, what's the exact words? They wouldn't lose face if they re-promoted Kvyat to the main team again.
Yeah, Franz just said that, didn't he?
Yeah, he's like, it's, you know, we're fine with that. He's a very fast driver. He's, you know, had an interesting story where he's sort of gone up and down in the Red Bull team. But we feel fully, I'm sort of paraphrasing, but they feel very, very fully comfortable with promoting him back up to the main team again. So, I think, because we've spoken about this a couple of times before about, whether they would promote Kvyat because of certain people would feel a bit embarrassed about it, but they seem pretty comfortable with it. And maybe they're also saying that to sort of encourage Gasly along, just to remind them that they do have a very fast driver in the sort of pipeline of drivers they have and ready to take that seat anytime.
I don't want Gasly to lose his seat, but what I would say, just to finish this point off, is if somebody had told me 12 months ago to this day that Daniel Kvyat would be back in that Toro Rosso in 2019, I'd have laughed so hard in their face. And God, don't be ridiculous. That's never going to happen. Look, why would they put him back in that car? And then, 3 months later, they're all the rumours start about him returning. So never say never, I guess is what I'm saying. But Racing Point is, I think, the penultimate team we need to cover in what is Formula 1.5. Again, a bit like Alfa, actually, I find. Just quite quiet, getting on with it. Relatively consistent in terms of Sergio Perez, although I've got to say I don't think Lance Stroll has been that bad on a Sunday. He's certainly delivered some good comeback drives, but somebody, and I'm so sorry, I meant to get your name out of the comment section, or I think it was a live chat actually, somebody made a very good point. They can't work out if Lance Stroll is that good on a Sunday that he deserves a lot of credit, or he's that bad on a Saturday in a good car that the Sunday then makes him look better, because I hope you see what I'm trying to say here. He's able to come back through the field in a good car, if that makes sense. So is it that he's really good on a Sunday, or is it that he's just that bad on a Saturday?
Reverse Haas situation. Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of both. That's clearly a nice, strong, stable car under him, and I agree. I don't think his Stroll is as bad as sort of his points make him look. He does definitely need to up it in qualifying, because I think he's been out in Q1, I don't know how many times, 3 or 4. It's quite a shocking number.
It's all season so far, and I think he was...
Has he?
I think it goes back to last year as well with Williams. I think a couple of races ago, it was something like 13 or 14 or something like that. I think.
I was being generous with him then, but still, that's not where Racing Point want to be. But I think on the whole, I think we sort of went into this season thinking in our hearts, Racing Point would just pick up where Force India left off and be sort of the fourth or fifth best team and start, challenging that area where Renault and McLaren are. But in our heads, we kind of knew a lot of money sort of disappeared in the middle of last season, and it didn't really show itself until now, because they were still sort of running along on what they'd already developed, and we knew they were going to have to sort of have a bit of a building year. Even though Stroll and his investors do seem to have put quite a solid plan in place, sort of building that team up and getting them back to where they are. So I think we can't be too disappointed with them. I think they're kind of where they expect to be. I think the drivers might be a little frustrated that they're not able to do what they were doing last year, but I think everyone knows, what's happening in that team.
A lot of people, I can't word this any better, I've been thinking about how to word this, think that Sergio Perez is king of that midfield. They think he is the best driver in that midfield and is unlucky not to find himself in a Ferrari, for example, or a Mercedes maybe. Lance Stroll, in air quotes, has only scored 7 fewer than him. I don't think that's terrible. And I know people can be like, oh, you just defended him. But yeah, I am, I guess, a bit. I think he gets a lot of stick because of who his dad is. But he's not as bad as people. He's not brilliant. He's not amazing. He's not the greatest thing we've ever seen. But you have to accept, unfortunately, or you don't have to accept, but you ought to accept, that so long as his dad owns that team, he's probably going to be in Formula One forever. Forever, like Lando Norris would say, what, forever? So, yeah, that's not going to go anywhere, or he's not going to go anywhere. I don't have an issue with Lance Stroll. I don't think 6 points is terrible. If he sorts his Saturdays out, he's probably on par with Perez in terms of points, or at least following him home every weekend. So, sort his Saturdays out.
He's got 7 less points than Perez, which is technically less than half of Perez's points. But again, it's the Saturdays that are stumping him. Other than hoping that he becomes consistently solid enough that we don't have to worry about whether or not he deserves that seat or whether he's just been given that seat. I hope when his career reaches a point where he's probably should leave F1, they can have that frank discussion and not embarrass themselves with the family connections. I don't want the family connections to come into it at all. I don't want it to get to a point where I know we're already discussing like his relationship with his father and the team, and he's only there because, but I don't want it to be an issue that overhangs his seat, because I think that's going to be rubbish.
Separate family and business kind of thing is what we want to see, don't we? We'll see. We'll see how he gets on. But again, like you said, if he sorts out his Saturdays, I think he'll do much better. But it was something that Otmar Safnauer said, when was it? I'm sure it was towards the end of last season when everyone was talking about, no, it wasn't. It was not long after it had been announced that Saturdays was his weak point and they were going to work with him on his one-lap pace to help him sort of get to where he needs to be and sort out his qualifying problems, and they just haven't so far. So, look, some drivers just aren't quick over one lap and are better in a race when, at the end of the day, would you rather your driver... I mean, you obviously prefer your driver to be quick on a Saturday and a Sunday, but if you had to pick one day a weekend where your driver is quick, you'll want them on the Sunday when the points are paid out. So that's, I guess, one way to look at it. But I don't think it's been as bad as some expected. One team who have been as bad and possibly worse than some expected, Williams. Even in Formula 1.5, Stuart, they've only got 8 points on the board and are nearly 100 behind Haas. It's been absolutely shocking for them, hasn't it, this season? And I don't want to tear them a new one. I don't, because I think we've done it enough. I think we've given them grief. We've taken the mickey a little bit as well, but I just don't see a way back this season. I doubt there'll be a way back next season, and I think we could be looking at a team that, unless there is a major rules reset, which I don't think 2021 is going to be, I really hope I'm wrong, but unless it's a major rules reset, as we saw, say, 2014, for example, when the last time they made the jump towards the sharp end of the field, I can't see how or when they're going to be able to challenge the top end of that midfield, let alone even contemplate the idea of podiums, winning races and world championships. It's just not... How can I word this? I feel kind of dreadful saying it. They are Williams in name alone at the moment.
Yeah, people joining F1 in the last couple of years would be amazed to hear what Williams used to be. We're sort of amazed in reverse. Even though I've kind of defended him a bit and I kind of don't think it's true, I really want it to be true that this is all Paddy Lowe's fault. And now that he's gone, they can be on a good car. Can you imagine?
Go grab Pat Fry.
Yeah, and they got rid of Paddy Lowe and he's just was designing a real clunker. Probably not the case, but I don't know. I mean, we talked about some teams' long-term strategy. I think Williams need a really long-term strategy. I think, they're going to spend 10 years building themselves back up because it's really hard being at the bottom to get yourself back up. You get pittance amount of money, you get pittance and not much interest from sponsors. It's clear Williams are confused about why their car is so slow and what direction it's going in. It's the only car that's slower than last year. The hope I have in my heart is that we keep being surprised in Formula One. Like, this whole conversation has been like, we thought this, but this happened. We always look like idiots when we try and predict things, even 6 months ago. So Williams could turn around, have figured out the roots of what's wrong with that car, what's wrong with their organization, and sort of turn up 2020, 2021 with a vastly improved car and be sort of follow McLaren in that journey back to the top. It's becoming hard to know what to say about Williams. Do you know what I mean? It's not. Yeah, it's just like agree. They just are at the back, really, really far at the back, almost in a completely different series.
I think that's the thing, as I said, they're there. That when we talk about them on race reaction streams, and Williams, I mean, they turned up. Because what else could you say? I mean, they're not. Just going back to your point about sponsors as well. Obviously, if you're down the back end of the field, sponsors less likely to come in, as you were saying there. But then, of course, that has a knock-on effect in that you have to take drivers that have a checkbook, which, with the greatest of respect to some of the drivers they've had over the years, don't tend to be the best of talents or the quickest drivers out there. George Russell, I think he's not a paid driver, so he's tied to Mercedes, but I think he's been solid and has done a good job in what is, as we know, a terrible car. He has, I'm sorry, Kubica fans, he's absolutely wiped the floor with Robert Kubica so far. Still time for Kubica to turn it around, of course. But I've got, oh dear, I've got to go over this. Okay, there is this thing floating around. I get it on videos all the time. I don't know if you do, Stuart. People saying that the only reason Kubica is where he is because there is favouritism at the team for George Russell. George Russell is getting all the favouritism. Whilst I'm not going to sit here and say 100% that's not true, because I don't know. There could be favouritism in that team for George Russell. But we're talking about 19th and 20th here. are a team like Williams, who are really, really struggling to work out what the car is doing, right? Trying to get it fixed, trying to find a way to make their way up the grid, really going to take the time and put the effort into backing one driver to finish 19th rather than 20th. I am not convinced at all. And I think they've even swapped cars this season, or swapped chassis, and Russell was, again, I think, I haven't got the stuff in front of me, was still quicker. So I don't think it's a car issue. I really doubt there's any favouritism there. And if there is, frankly, Williams needs to have a word with themselves, because we're not talking about a guy that they're backing for the championship here. We're talking about a guy, like I say, who, if a couple of guys retire, might be lucky enough to finish 17th. I don't know what you think, Stuart, if you think there's a big conspiracy there and that's why Robert's struggling. I just think, perfectly honestly, Kubica is struggling because he's been away for so long and Formula One is not the same animal it was. I just want to clear up straight away before anybody calls me out for being a hater. I'm not at all. Robert Kubica, back in day when he was in Formula One first time around, was a fantastic talent, and a lot of people thought he was a future world champion and was on the brink of a move to the likes of Ferrari. So there's no denying that he's a talented guy, but he's been away for a long time. Formula One is not the same.
I totally agree with you. I think Russell is wiping the floor with him on merit. It benefits Williams nothing to favour one driver over the other when they just need to get someone to get a good result. I know they're sort of, building Russell up at the beginning of his Formula One career, but it doesn't, they're not they're not trying to get anything out of this. Kubica is an interesting one as well, because I was really backing him at the start. I really hoping he could do really well, and whatever his talent was and whatever his ability was, he wasn't being able to do much with this car in the end, we found out. So he was sort of still going to be 16th to 20th, whatever the circumstances. And I can't see him back in the car again next year. I think he'll definitely stay out the whole season, partly because I don't know who else would sit in that seat, and partly because I think he's got talent and experience to help develop the car and help the team understand, where the car is and what's improving it and how they can develop it for the rest of the season and into next year. But I think he knows that this is not worked out for him. And it's a crying shame. I really, really wanted it to.
It is nice that he's come back, though. It is still a great story. Even if he's not performing, it's still fantastic that he had the confidence in himself, and Williams had the confidence in him to bring him back to Formula One, but it hasn't worked. I can't. I tend to agree. I think he will see out the season, but number one, I think their preferred option is Nicholas Latifi, and he doesn't have the super license points. He brings a bit of money as well. And number two, sponsorship is probably paid up for the year, so they'll want to keep him in that car to bring in as much money as possible, going back to what we were saying earlier about them struggling to get that car sorted. So I think, he'll probably see out the season. Plus, the Williams need to make a change. Again, back to what I was saying earlier, he pulls it out and suddenly Kubica starts delivering. Great, he's 19th instead of 20th. They don't need to be making a change. They're not fighting for anything in the championship, are they? So I think he'll see that one out. But we'll round off Formula 1.5. Sort of. Who do you think is going to take that title in the drivers and the constructors, Stuart? I'm going to go with... he's already there, but I'm going to go with Carlos Sainz for the driver's side of it. And I really do think McLaren have got a fantastic opportunity to take him fourth here.
By which you mean first in the 1.5?
Yeah, in the 1.5, yeah. I don't think Sainz is going to overcome Hamilton.
No, well, unless something magic happens. I mean, Carlos Sainz is having a very solid season. It's interesting that Kimi Räikkönen is second. I'm assuming on the YouTube feed you actually have them on the screen, the standings. McLaren just had their first 1-2 of the Formula 1.5 series. I don't see anyone really overhauling McLaren unless we have one of those big changes we talked about. So I'm backing one of those drivers to take the top spot.
So there's a whole subreddit, isn't there, dedicated to this Formula 1.5, but FOM, it's not recognised as an official anything. It is just a fan thing, really. It's fantastic. It's a really good read. Some of the stuff on there is great, and it's brilliant that we've got this comparison, being able to pull out the top three teams and look at what would be if Formula One was like this.
Definitely go and look at it if you haven't seen it before, because
and follow them on Twitter.
It's
I think
treated.
As well.
It's like an alternate universe where Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull don't exist, and it's taken very seriously. They have race reports, they have lap charts, they have graphs of the points across the season. It's amazing.
It's a very good read. But I was going to say no recognition from FOM as such. I was going to say, do you think that maybe not necessarily a world championship, but maybe they should make something out of it? I mean, for example, they do the fastest pit stop championship, so why not have this Formula 1.5? But Bernie, Brace yourself, he's back. Apparently had a fantastic idea in his eyes for a total rejig of Formula One. So I've got this bullet pointed. So I'll go through it as quickly as I can because I don't want to go on forever about it. But it'd be interesting to get your reaction to this, Stuart, because part of me loves this and part of me thinks, what are you on about? But he's suggesting 2 championships effectively. So a Constructors and a Teams Championship. Both of them would be World Championships. So if you won the Teams title, you would win the World Championship. If you won the Constructors Championship, you would win the World Championship, with the drivers staying as it is. His quote was, by having 2 championships aside from the drivers, we are helping the small teams while letting the manufacturers race the way they want. So Constructors Championship is for those who build the engine and chassis, so that's your Mercedes and Ferrari, for example. But the Teams Championship would see the likes of Williams, Racing Point, Haas, for example, running what is called a very sophisticated Formula 2 car, so completely spec, 1 engine a season with a spare in case of failures. An engine, I think he said, similar to the hybrids that we have now. A $30 million a year budget, and they would need to raise any more they want through sponsorship. If a team such as, or an engine manufacturer such as Honda or Renault walked away, he would ask them to build the power unit for the series. He would bring back refueling, but make it optional. 1 set of tyres, but if you pit to refuel, you can change tyres. You can see where this starts to unravel. If those in the Teams Championship were too slow, he'd make the constructor cars heavier to close up the field. Believes that they would help the teams find 2 seconds, and with refueling and tyre strategies in play, that could be another second a lap, and would allow teams to enter just 1 car if they choose to. Bernie. There's some. I tell you what, there's actually some fairly good points in there, but then you get to optional refueling and ballast and things like that, and allowing 1 car in, and you're like, all right, Bernie, just calm down, put the whiskey down, and relax.
It's Bernie, I think, often likes to say things that he doesn't necessarily mean, and him and Max Mosley used to do this a lot when they were both sort of at the forefront of Formula One, suggesting something wild that would never happen, but negotiating backwards from there. Bernie, I think this is a little bit of that. I think it's a little bit of just like, partly he just likes to hear himself talk. Partly I think he just likes to throw wild ideas into the ether and get a discussion going about them. And from that, in tearing apart some of these ideas, I don't think are going to work. I think you should bring back refueling, I think, and making it optional and changing tyres optional is not really making it optional at all, because everyone would change tyres. Once you get talking about it and breaking down what works and what doesn't work, you can sort of get yourself to a position of things you do agree with. I think in throwing out weird ideas, even like, his classic idea that he used to say was having sprinklers at the side of the circuit because wet races are more exciting. And that was never going to happen, but it did prompt conversation about why were wet races so exciting and what is it about wet races that we can capture without having to make, the track wet. And sort of where we actually ended up from that conversation was the sort of very, very quick wearing Pirelli tyres, 2 or 3 pit stops a race. There was a massive cliff. So yeah, my charitable interpretation of this is Bernie is just throwing, grenades into the fire and seeing what we can all learn from this. But also he's always been one to just suggest wild things to get people talking.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I've kind of brought it up is because, in fact, when you look at some of the points he's made, so the idea of having the 2 championships, maybe making that second championship, the Teams Championship, a spec series, it's kind of, obviously the spec aside, it's kind of what Formula One is anyway, isn't it? The two series, you've got Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull battling it out for the title, and then you've got the rest in what has become known as Formula 1.5. So maybe, I guess, going back to that point, does Formula 1, if they can't, obviously Liberty are going to have a good crack at it, but if they can't get 2021 right and they can't close this field up, do they need to maybe, or should they look at making a second championship, a proper Formula 1.5, so that at least the best of the rest title means something, and the likes of McLaren, Renault, Haas and Co. turn up weekend to weekend with something to fight for, rather than just, oh, well, at least we weren't last.
The problem I kind of foresee immediately is that some of the non-works constructors, they want to compete in a championship where they make their own chassis, and that they pride themselves in that. Williams is one that comes to mind. They've never been someone to make their own engine, but being a constructor that constructs their own chassis and car and, uses their engineering ingenuity to beat the competition and show everyone up. That's part of what Williams is. And I think Williams would leave immediately if there was any element of a spec series. They wouldn't enter this Constructors Championship. They'd sooner figure out a way to build their own engines than do that. Maybe increasing the size of the field to allow, like we have in WEC and those kind of series, to the tiers, the different classes, the 2 classes of things where you do have this, because it's clearly going to be a 2-class system, and allowing people like Williams and Racing Point and McLaren to compete in the main championship, whether they build their own engines or not. But then also having this kind of more specky championship, which, actually the more I talk about it, it's like, well, just let the Formula 2 cars race during the same race and call it a class formula. I'm negative about just taking the 10 teams we have and making one of them have spec cars and spec engines and sort of be a completely different sport.
I'll be honest, I'm quite torn on it. I think didn't Sky give a best of the rest trophy out last year? I can't remember who got it. Hulkenberg got it. I don't think he looked overly thrilled to have got it, but just something like that for a bit of recognition would be good. But I go right back to your first point you made there about teams building cars, constructors. If we take even this grid or an extended grid and we make Formula 1 and then a second class Formula 1 in the same field, is that Formula 1 anymore? I mean, I hate using that line as well. That's not Formula 1. Because I'll tell you something now. The whole, you can't do that because that's not in Formula 1's DNA brigade. That whole argument is part of the reason why Formula 1 is where it is. It's sort of positive and negative. It's the whole, you can't do that because that's not Formula 1. Well, why not? Again, I hate hiding behind it, but it's not Formula 1 if you start splitting the field up, because you just end up with open wheel WEC, don't you, really? As you were kind of, I think WEC was the example you used.
Yeah. I mean, you have to be very careful about it, and it definitely would need to be sort of an extended field. I think even if you started with an extended field, say you ended up with 9 proper Formula 1 constructors and then 6 of these sort of second tier models, and I think that, there's some benefits there. You could, at the top, people have B teams that are sort of spec teams that they can run quite cheap, and they could put their junior drivers in, and they without the stress of a full Formula 1 seat. I can see some benefits of that. You could iron out through sort of discussion. However, sort of building to this point, this concern I have is over time, as the main tier manufacturers struggle perhaps and think about the cost implications, and maybe if that second tier is quite exciting, they could start downgrading themselves, and we end up in a sort of situation that actually WEC has right now, where the top tier is actually quite sparse and there's lots of people in these bottom tiers, and even the bottom tiers in WEC are not like spec cars, they're actually proper teams. So, and I don't think we'd want the risk of Formula 1 devolving into this sort of advanced Formula 2 just over time.
I suppose building on that, the other issue you've got is, and it's kind of an issue we've got now, if Red Bull turned around tomorrow and said they're quitting Formula 1, you lose, is it 20% of the field? Something like that. Yeah, you lose 4 cars, 2 teams. If you've then got Mercedes turn around and go, we're off to concentrate solely on Formula E, and they've got a B team and they supply engines to 3 others, all of a sudden you've got a right mess. I think the other thing, from a racing standpoint now, the issue with, I think your idea would work to a point, but my issue would be you'd then have 6 teams, 12 drivers that were effectively mobile chicanes. And then you get to the final race of the season and Mercedes call on their B team, hey, don't let that Ferrari through, will you? And all of a sudden you've got this, I don't know, I could just see it getting really political, and you've got Mercedes then have got extra votes and Ferrari have got extra votes, but Red Bull have decided not to run another team and they haven't. And if we dig deep enough, it all falls apart very, very quickly. But yeah, I think in principle it could work, but I don't expect even a little bit of Bernie's idea to be taken seriously by Liberty. They've got their plans, and we'll see where they end up for 2021, which, again, as we discussed the other week, we're sort of umming and ahhing a little bit about, aren't we? We're not completely sold that these changes that they're promising are as revolutionary as we were all hoping for, but we'll see. That we'll not get back into 2021, plenty to cover there, but I think we will leave it there. We've been going for quite a while. We talked quite well on the midfield for quite a long time, actually, and what I will say is, people watch F1 for the championship. Of course they do. People watch for Mercedes winning races. If they're Mercedes fans, they want to see a world championship fight. They tune in to watch Verstappen versus Leclerc in Austria. They're not tuning in necessarily week in, week out to see Grosjean take on Lance Stroll. But when the racing isn't so great at the front, it is really good to know that we've got an incredibly tight midfield to fall back on to give us some sort of entertainment. And what we've seen of it on TV, still cannot believe we saw next to nothing of Carlos Sainz's drive through the field until well after the weekend, by the way, in Austria. But from what we have seen of it, it's been pretty brilliant in that midfield. And the Formula 1.5 tables and the official championship reflect just how mad it's going to be. And as I've said already, this is going right down to the wire. And I, for one, Stuart, cannot wait.
Me either. It's a very exciting place, and I hope the cameras keep looking at it.
Yes.
We don't need. I didn't need to keep banging on about it, but this year has been a bit dire at spotting what's going on in the midfield. It's Carlos Sainz is not the first person they've missed having a dramatic run through the field.
Alex Albon in China was one, I think.
Yeah, it's just you've got to see these things coming. It's very strange what's happening this year. So if someone needs to go bang on the windows at Biggin Hill during a race weekend and just make sure they're paying attention to whoever's actually being exciting in the midfield. Yeah,
and of course Biggin Hill is in Kent.
That is correct.
As you think I'd maybe remember, that's written everywhere now. I can promise you after that quiz. Oh dearie me! I once again apologies to everyone in Kent, but yes, it's been lovely to sit and chat to you again this afternoon, Stuart. Nice just to have a chilled chat about something other than the championship, to be honest. But it's been a pleasure as always, and I'm sure I will talk to you shortly.
Yes, thank you very much for having me on. I'm glad we had a good race to talk about and such an exciting midfield. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much to Stuart as always, and thank you to you guys for tuning in. As I say at the end of all of these, if you are watching on YouTube, don't forget you can go and listen over on SoundCloud and Spotify. And if you're listening on SoundCloud and Spotify, don't forget this is available also over on YouTube. Now, I will be back soon with more content as ever. But in the meantime, don't forget that you can follow me on social media, and all of the links you need to that are in the description down below. But as ever, thank you for watching. I've been Sean. This has been the F1 Word, and until next time, goodbye.